こんばんは、時刻は夜10時を迎えました。皆さん改めましてジャーナリストの堀潤です。今日はね、都心では今すごく強い雨が降っていますが、これをご覧の地域の皆さんのお天気、夜でしょうか、ね、朝でしょうか、昼でしょうか。ちょうど先月から国連の世界食糧計画の皆さんと月刊 WFP と題して世界の人道支援の現場、特に食料をですね、必要としている人たちに届ける現場のリポートをシリーズでお伝えしております。前回はね、まさに日本の代表として、日本の事務局の代表、事務所の代表として直江さんにお話伺いましたけれども、今日はですね、さらに活動の現場目を向けていきたいなと思います。どこの現場かというとこちらです。ドン。飢饉の危機イエメン現地報告と題してお送りしましょう。実を言うとすでにですね、私先週、お話を伺いました。まさにイエメンといえば内戦、そして、現在ではコロナによっての飢餓にあえでいる地域の一つなんですが、非常に深刻な状況に陥っています。はい、ちょうど今日もYouTube ライブで皆さんからコメントをいただきながらお話進めていきたいなと思っておりますので、ぜひコメントがあればこちらにお寄せください。本当にコロナで僕らも世界中あちこち取材に行くことが制約が加わっていて、一方で今世界では飢餓人口が増加に転じていて、さらにこの1年の間ではコロナによってその飢餓人口というのは急増していると。そうした中、イエメンではもう7年近く戦争紛争が続いていまして、多くの国民が苦しんでいると。僕もイエメンは絶対に現場を訪ねてみたいなと思っている国の地域の一つなんですが、そうした中 WFP の皆さんが活動を続けています。貴重な現地の映像からご覧いただきましょう。どうぞ。ご覧いただいている映像は内戦長く続いています。長らく続く紛争、戦争が7年目に突入しました。人々が3回目4回目の避難を余儀なくされています。で、実を言うと紛争が始まる前の水準を200% も上回る食料の上昇と、食料価格の上昇というのが続いています。紛争の拡大で飢餓が増加というのが現状です。何百万人もの人々が食料を手に入れることができなくなっています。そしてそこに新型コロナウイルスの第2波がイエメンを襲い、医療システムが対応できなくなっていると。 WFP がまさに現地からそうしたリポートを発信しています。ちょうど飢饉、極めて深刻な食料不足ですね。5万人近い状況だと。で、さらに500万人が飢饉の一歩手前だという状況なんですね。紛争やそうした食糧難、新型ウイルス、さまざまな困難が今ご覧いただいているような子どもたちの命、子どもたちの安心した暮らしにも大きな暗い影を落としています。現地でね、活動されている方々のお話、この後じっくりと伺いますが、こうした声に耳を傾けてみると、今まさにお話しされているのは、ここには何もないんだと、必要なものは何一つ足りていないんだと、支援が必要なんだと、深刻さを増しているぞと、そうした警鐘を現地から鳴らしてくださっています。国連の WFP は食料緊急支援をですね、約1300万人に対して行っています。そして330万人の子どもと母親に対して栄養不足の治療や予防のための栄養補助食品の支援を行っています。しかしまだまだ支援が必要なんですよね。そうした中、現地で活動を続けている WFP の職員の方にお話を伺いました。リモートでインタビューをしておりますのでお聞きください。 I introduce myself. My name is Jun. I am a journalist and I'm working as a newscaster on Japanese TV news program. So I want to know more detail about the crisis of Yemen. Yeah. So today, very important interview. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time to this interview today, Annabelle-san. In spite of the famine crisis in Yemen, the situation in Yemen is not well reported in Japan. So I think today's interview is valuable information from there. Today, can you tell us about the individual stories of Yemenis so that people can feel closer to Yemen?
Absolutely. Well, as you say, the situation in Yemen is incredibly serious, and one that I believe everyone around the world should have an awareness of. This is a conflict that has been raging for over 6 years and has caused, as a result, the world's worst humanitarian crisis. Now, when we talk about what that means, that's 5 million people living on the brink of famine, 50,000 people already in famine-like conditions, and a total of half the population who are facing hunger every single day. But it can actually sometimes be slightly overwhelming when we think just about those numbers. Those numbers are quite difficult to visualize. What does 5 million hungry people on the brink of famine, what does that actually mean? What does that actually look like? And that's where, so my role with the World Food Programme in Yemen, I lead the communications team here, and I have the amazing privilege of being able to go out and meet many of the men, women and children that WFP is supporting. We're supporting 13 million people with food assistance, 3.3 million mothers and children with nutrition support, and 1.5 million kids in school with daily school snacks. So again, huge numbers. But let me tell you a few of the sort of stories of some of the people that I've met. Just recently, just in March, I was in an area called Taiz. It's a governorate called Taiz, and I was in the coastal area of Taiz, which is on Yemen's west coast. And I met a fisherman called Salam. He has 7 children. He's in his 50s. He didn't know his exact age, which is common in Yemen. People often don't know exactly how old they are. And before the conflict, he had had a great livelihood as a fisherman. He was able to support his family. They lived a simple life, but nonetheless, they had enough food. He had enough money to be able to send his kids to school, and overall, life was good. He talked about the sort of the freedom of being able to, get on his boat and travel out to sea in order to fish, and he had come from, generations of fishermen. That whole community, it's a small community called Dubab. They're all fishermen. Anyway, now, as a result of the conflict, he's had his livelihood stolen from him, taken away. The coastal area is mined, both along the coast and in the sea itself. So it's dangerous now for fishermen to go out. Many unfortunately have died. And then on top of that, the 2 main markets that the fishermen of Dubab, which is a small community, that they used to sell their fish to, which is the main city of Taiz and the main city of Hodeidah, both of them are on the other side of front lines. So he can't even get his fish to a market, even if he was able to go out and fish. And now he's in this situation where he's reliant on food assistance, and he receives every month food assistance from WFP, and his kids also attend a school where they receive school snacks from WFP. But the thing that he wants more than anything is to be able to go back to being self-sufficient, go back to his livelihood. But until that day, WFP will be there to support him in this immediate crisis.
أيام النزاع كانت يعني فيها تشتغل كذا وتروح لك بأي بلد تروح لك، لكن بعد النزاع ما عاد توصل أي مكان. الوضع مش كما كان أول، كان يعني في حالة تعب، نحن في حالة التعب هنا ومشردين وذاك ما فيش وذاك ما فيش. كل واحد يحس بالعيال الصغار، ما أنت تتحمل، أنت إذا أكلت نقصت الأكل على نفسك تشبع عيال الصغار عيالك علشان يرتاحوا ويرقدوا. أنت كبرت تصبر.
And how COVID-19 is affecting the people?
So COVID-19 has had a very serious and very real impact on people in Yemen. There was a first wave of COVID in sort of March, April 2020, and then actually an even more deadly second wave that hit in sort of March, April time this year. One of the things, so numbers has been very difficult to track. Testing capacity in Yemen is very limited. And many people don't have access to health facilities. Over half, barely half of all health facilities in Yemen are fully functioning right now as a result of the war. So that means that many people stayed at home when they should have been seeking medical care, but equally, in order to self-isolate, to follow some of the social distancing things, which many of us in Western countries were encouraged to do and were able to do, that's actually very, very difficult for families who rely on daily incomes in order to eat that day. I remember right at the beginning of the pandemic, speaking to a woman, an older woman who was out at a WFP distribution point collecting food. And I said to her, but what about COVID? You know, does that worry you? And she said, we've seen worse. The conflict is worse. And then she said, but what do you want me to do? How can I stay at home? If I stay at home, I will starve. So I have to go out. And I think that was a reality, unfortunately, for many, many people in Yemen.
Yeah. Can you tell us about the long-running civil war in Yemen? Civil war, how civil war is affecting the people?
So the humanitarian crisis has been precipitated by the conflict. You've got around 4 million people in Yemen, that's out of a population of 30 million, who have been forced to flee their homes as a result of the conflict. Right now, we're in the 6th year, but actually in the last few months, we've seen some of the worst and deadliest fighting that has been seen throughout this over half a decade of conflict. And that means that for many families, as front lines shift, they flee, and then front lines shift again and they have to flee again. And so now in the 6th year of war, I meet families who have been forced to move 2-3 times, and every single time they lose more and their ability to respond, to bounce back, gets further exhausted. So the way WFP supports these the families who are directly affected by conflict, is that we provide immediate response rations of foods that can be eaten without needing a kitchen, without needing cooking materials. So it's canned foods, because when a family has initially been displaced, been forced to flee, often they have absolutely nothing. So we're working with our other UN partners, UNFPA, UNICEF, IOM and UNHCR, to make sure that immediately families are provided with tents through UNHCR, and then food, hygiene kits. And then once that initial response is delivered to them, and we aim to get that to these families within the first week of them being displaced. So it really is about that rapid response. We then make sure that they're added to WFP's monthly distribution lists. And that's where we're providing, through the monthly distributions, we're providing important staple foods. So that's flour, pulses, oil, sugar, salt. So the basics that a family will need. But the conflict has not only led to this huge displacement of people, but it's also crippled the economy. And I think that's the other important thing to remember about the humanitarian crisis in Yemen, is that there is food. There is food available in the markets, but the almost total economic collapse that has been caused by the conflict means that for most people, they can't afford this food. In many places, prices are up to 200% more expensive than they were before the conflict started. And then on top of that, families have had their incomes and their livelihoods destroyed. Public sector workers have not had salaries paid. Many, they've been paid very intermittently. And also the currency has lost a huge amount of its value since compared to pre-conflict. And there are actually in effect two currencies right now in Yemen, because the two main parties of the conflict have effectively created different monetary policies, which has effectively created this split economy, which again has made it even more complicated for families. And the impact means that food availability is low, food prices are high, and people can't afford to feed themselves.
Yeah, there are so serious situation in Yemen, the COVID-19 and the long civil war. I want to know more individual stories. What is the situation and what are the problems the people are facing?
Well, let me tell you a story actually about, which I think really kind of encapsulates what this economic cost of the war has meant for people. If I rewind a little bit, back in late 2018, WFP warned, the UN as a whole, we warned that Yemen was on the risk of famine. And then throughout 2019, we were able to massively increase assistance. And there was also the international community came together and there was some macroeconomic support to Yemen. And actually that helped stabilize the situation. And by the end of 2019, it was more stable. There was still a huge and very high rates of hunger, but it was more stable than it had been before. And it was at that point that I met a mother called Sally, a mother of 3 children. And she had fled with her family from Hodeidah, and they now lived in a camp just outside of Aden. And I sat with Sally in her tent. She was cooking a meal for her kids, and she had some rice and she had some dried fish that she'd bought. And it was a simple meal, but it was a good meal. Her youngest son had been malnourished, but had received support from WFP and he was doing better. A few months later, this was just before COVID hit, it was in sort of early March 2020, I went back to visit her again. So it was only 4 months later. And life had totally changed for her. The prices of food had gone up so much just in those 4 months that she told me that now breakfast, instead of being bread and some beans, was only bread. And dinner, instead of being rice and some vegetables and maybe a little bit of fish on days when she could afford it, it was only rice. And the pain, when she told me this, she knew that she wasn't giving enough to her children. And her youngest son was once again malnourished. In fact, he was so malnourished that his hair had started to go blonde. That's a sign of very acute malnutrition. It's obviously very, on kids with dark hair, it looks very striking because he suddenly had this very blonde hair when his hair should have been dark brown or even black. And speaking to Sally, her anguish at knowing that she wasn't giving her children, her 3 sons, the start to life that they needed, it was, well, to me, it's one of the stories that I just remember on an almost daily basis. I found it absolutely heartbreaking. And WFP was providing them still with cash assistance, but we try to change the quantity of the cash assistance to match to the price rises, but sometimes there's a bit of a lag. And we also have to make sure that we're standardizing, so it's a complex calculation that we have to do. And unfortunately, she was in that moment when there had been that lag, and she was really struggling.
Thank you very much. I want to know the situation of WFP Yemen. Do you have enough funds and supplies?
So right now, we're in a better position than we were a year ago. Let me start by saying that. Tragically, in 2020, actually at a time when we were seeing needs increase because of COVID, because of conflict escalating, and then also because of the economy declining further, we were in a horrendous position of actually having to cut assistance because we didn't have the funds. We received less than half the funds that we needed last year. So as a result, in some parts of the country, in order to try and maintain a safety net for families for as long as possible, we had to reduce the distribution cycle. Instead of providing families with food every 1 month, we were providing them with food every 2 months. So effectively, we were giving them half. Now, thankfully, we have been able to start to scale up. We have so far this year received a little bit over half of what we need for the year. So it doesn't get us to the end, but we are halfway through the year now, and so it is more positive that we're in this position. And as a result of that, we have been progressively increasing the assistance again in the areas with the highest rates of food insecurity. So all the areas with famine conditions are getting monthly support now, and all the areas with people who are one step away from famine are also now getting monthly support, which is absolutely vital. And we hope, it's too early to be able to see what the impact is yet, but we anticipate that come sort of end of August, we might be able to begin to see whether that increase is having an impact, and obviously very much hope that it is. Luckily, one of our main priorities throughout this period when funding was so difficult is we did make sure that we maintained the nutrition support. So we provide nutrition support to mothers who are pregnant or breastfeeding and children who are under 5. And despite how tight and difficult the situation has been for the last year, we were able to maintain that vital support for the children and the mothers. Because as I'm sure you know, malnutrition in a child, which starts with the mother also being healthy during her pregnancy and in those first months when she's hopefully able to breastfeed her child, is absolutely vital to giving a child a full, ensuring that they can fully develop cognitively as well as physically, and to grow up to be the adults, the future adult that can be a productive member of society. So that's an absolutely core part of our support. And I can actually tell you another story about a little boy that we've been following who is thankfully now better. So we met him. He's a little boy called Sultan from Sana. Oh, sorry, from Hodeidah, but he lives in Sana. So also an IDP. His family also forced to flee. And we first met Sultan in September 2020, and he was acutely malnourished at the time. He had been enrolled in the WFP food assistance, nutrition program, and so he was receiving monthly nutrition supplements. But unfortunately, his family was one of those families who was only receiving the full food assistance on alternate months. So it was making things very, very difficult for his family. But then when we kept in touch with him, and then when we met him again in January this year, We visited with him when he went to a checkup at the WFP nutrition clinic, and to everyone's relief, he was measured, and he's now considered a healthy weight for his age. And his mother almost cried. She sort of almost burst into tears when she heard that her son was now healthy. And when I asked her, well, how does it feel? She said, I just want to hug him. I'm just going to hug him all day.
أنا إيلاف عمري 10 سنوات. لما بدأت الحرب كان عمري 6 سنوات تقريبا. لما كنا أعرف اللي نعيشه سمحت. أتذكر لما كان يتخبى بيوتنا من أصوات الصواريخ والرصاص. عرفنا من الحديدة تركنا خلف عنا كل أغراضنا. تركنا أغراضنا وبيتنا وملابسنا لعابنا أجينا العدن. هنا ليس لدينا بيت ولا كهرباء بس خيمة. ساعات بالجوع كنت أبكي من ألم بطني. قبل الحرب كان حياتي طبيعية وكل شيء حولي جميل. كان عندي أشياء جميلة لم أستطيع أخذها معي. لم نستطيع شرائها مجددا. الآن مساعدات البرنامج مصدر الطعام الرئيسي لي ولعائلتي. أتمنى أن تنتهي الحرب ونلقى بيوتنا. أخاف نزيد الحرب ننزح مرة أخرى.
So this is Hayat, who's a mother of 3. Those are her 3 little girls also in the photo. She fled from a village in Thais to the coast of Thais after an airstrike hit her village and killed her husband. When she fled, she was actually pregnant with her 3rd child, who's the little girl with the purple headscarf in the middle of the 3 girls. And she fled alone with her 2 small daughters and heavily pregnant. And she had to sell the 2 gold bracelets that her husband had given her daughters. She sold them in order to be able to pay to flee to safety. So she now receives WFP food assistance, but she has no other source of income. So actually the food assistance the WFP provides is the staple foods, the flour, pulses, oil, sugar and salt. But she actually has to barter and exchange. She exchanges small quantities of flour for other things like vegetables. She has absolutely no other way of earning money. Which unfortunately is quite common for widows. And she lives in a very basic camp here. The next photo, let me see. Oh, there we are. This is the camp that she lives in with a few other families. Very, very simple, very basic life. And what you don't see in this photo, being a photo, is that we're on the coast. This is on the coast, and the wind is brutal. It never lets up, and as a result there is constant dust, and so the poor children often have infections in their eyes, and there is dust everywhere. It never stops. I spent the day with them, and I found it exhausting, and this is where they live. This is how they live day to day. And here's another photo of the three children. Their toy was an empty WFP oil can. And then this is Sultan, the little boy who I mentioned before, who was malnourished in Sana. This is when he was still malnourished. He's sitting on his mother's lap, she's called Sophia. And this was him in the nutrition clinic. He was brought by his father, Arafat, and he was being measured there to check his malnutrition status. Then WFP provides this peanut-based paste called Plumpy Sup, which is what he's eating in this picture. It's peanut based, and it's fortified with vitamins and minerals, to provide a malnourished child with everything that they need in order to regain strength, regain weight, and to be able to start growing. And then this last photo I have of Sultan. This is in January. At this point, he's better. He's healthy. And as you can see from his lovely cheeky smile, playing on his father's motorbike, which I don't think he was allowed to do, really. And he was a lovely little boy, very playful, and finally able to really, be a little boy again. Whereas the first time we met him, he was quite lethargic. He was very, just wanted to be in his mother's arms. And now he was sort of playing and being a little boy again. And then this is Salam, who's the fisherman that I told you about. As you see, he lives in a very basically constructed hut. But this is the way his family has always lived. They've always lived in this kind of structure. And he was very proud of the fact that he was still living at home, but he was equally absolutely devastated that he had lost his livelihood as a fisherman, and with that his identity as a fisherman, which was a livelihood that had been his livelihood for many years, his father's livelihood before that. So I felt when talking to him that, the conflict had really taken a lot from him in terms of his identity and his pride. And this was him with two of his sons. He had 7 children. His 2 eldest children were actually already married and had families of their own, and these were 2 of his younger children, his younger sons, eating a basic meal of just, it was bread ripped up and put together with a little bit of milk and water, a very, very basic meal. And then this is Sally's family. So the lady the mother who I told you about. This was a photo taken actually in the good times. As you can see, they were eating a meal of fish and some rice, and a good meal. And her 3 sons obviously enjoying it, and it was absolutely heartbreaking to go back there a few months later, just 4 months later, and to find them in such a difficult situation after things had been looking more positive. And let's just hope that we can start to get Yemen back into that positive place again. And then finally, actually, a story that I didn't tell you about. This is Nawal and her baby. Nawal is also an IDP. She's fled from Hodeidah, and she now lives in actually the same camp as Sally, just outside of Aden. Now, Nawal is a trained midwife, and before the conflict, she worked as a midwife in a hospital and in her community in Hodeidah. And when she fled Hodeidah after the fighting came to her area, her neighborhood, and the house next door to theirs was hit in an airstrike, and so it were her brother and her parents. Her husband had actually left her with quite a small baby at that time. They fled down to Aden, down to safety. Down in Aden, they now receive cash assistance from WFP, which helps them meet their daily food needs. And Nawal, despite being a displaced person herself, despite living now in a tent, she continues to work as a midwife for the other women in the camp. With very limited resources, she goes tent to tent, supporting the women with their prenatal checks and helping them through labor, and she refuses to take any payment from them. And it was so inspiring to hear her story, and also to hear how important being able to do this work was to her. And I think that through the conflict has stolen and has taken so much. It's taken people's homes, it's taken people's loved ones. And for Nawal to be able to hold on to her identity as a midwife, her profession was incredibly important to her and a real source of strength for her. And I just love this photo of her with her daughter. I just think it's beautiful.
Right.
حصل قصف ضرب طيران والطائرة ضربت زوجي طبعا بهذاك القصف الذي كان. بعد ما حصل القصف نزحنا إلى ماوية، من ماوية أجينا لهنا. كان شعوري مؤلم جدا، ويعني كنت دورت سيارة تنزح لهنا ما حصلتش حتى كرة السيارة. حاولت، كان معايا يعني شوها حق أولادي ورت لهم إياهم أبوهم يعني وبعتها، وجيت يعني شلت سيارة وجيت لهنا نزحت لحالي. طبعا ما فيش واحد معي لحالي يعني، والله الله سبحانه وتعالى معانا. والله العظيم إنني طول الليل أكون أبكي وأفكر من وين أجيب لهم أكل وأجيب لهم. لما تقوم بالليل بنتي تصحيني تقول لي يا أمي أنا جيعانة أشتي أكل، أقول لها ما في أنني أجيب لي. أقوم أحطها قدامي وأرقدها، طبعا جيعانة ما أقدرش أجيب لها أي شيء.
Next is last question. As a Japanese, how can Japanese people become more concerned about crisis in faraway places? I believe that indifference is a sin. But in Japan, the reality is that interest is low. Please give me a message as to what Japanese people should do.
So I think that if we look back at this last year that the whole world has experienced as a result of the pandemic, we have all lived with a terrible burden of uncertainty. Uncertainty about our health, uncertainty about whether we can go out, whether we can leave our homes, uncertainty about our jobs, uncertainty about the health of our families, uncertainty about what tomorrow is going to look like. Every day has felt very uncertain for many of us in all across the world, whether you're in Japan or in the UK, where I'm from, or in a country like Yemen. And I think that I would like to be optimistic that maybe we can take a lesson from the pandemic, and that little bit of uncertainty that all of us have experienced over this last year, that we can take that and turn that into empathy for people like those in Yemen who have been dealing with this kind of uncertainty for over 6 years as a result of the war. Uncertainty about whether their kids are going to survive, uncertainty about whether their kids can get an education, about whether they're going to have a job, about whether they can feed themselves and their family today to tomorrow. So I hope that the pandemic maybe kind of taught us all some empathy, and that would be really my main message to the Japanese people is remember Yemen and remember what you've been through these last few months, and hold that in your heart as you think of the people in Yemen as well.
皆さんイエメンの状況どうご覧になりましたか？ YouTube ライブのコメントを見ていると本当に一人一人の小さな主語で語ってくれるのがありがたいというコメントもありましたね。本当にありがとうございます。現地イエメンだけではなくて日本の事務所のスタッフの方々も協力をしてくださって、現地の翻訳を手伝ってくれました。こうして顔と名前とが見えてくるとまたそのイエメンという遠く離れた地域が一人一人の暮らしと私たちの暮らしがつながっているというイメージがより持てたんじゃないかなと思います。ね、子供がああやって最初は無気力な様子だった彼が再び訪ねてみると元気になっているっていう。一方でこの頃は食事が取れていたのに再び戻ってみると状況が悪化している。特にこのイエメンでは長らく続く紛争とそして今回の新型コロナによって非常に深刻な食糧難、続いています。ちょうど月刊 WFP では WFP が提供しているアプリも紹介しています。 シェア・ザ・ミールというアプリなんですが、これ人道支援、食料支援を行っている地域が一つ一つプロジェクト化されていて、我々が注目するべき気になる国に対して直接サポートができる仕組みです。例えば今日お伝えしたイエメンですと 89% ってここにね書いてあるんですね。こっちの方が見えるのかな。はい。見えますよね。これ必要な、食料のボリュームですよね。それに対して今どれぐらい集まっているのかっていうのが、ここに出ています。このアプリシェア・ザ・ミールとかをですね活用していただくと、例えば今日はイエメンでしたけども、次回はまた南スーダンをはじめ世界の各地の状況を伝えようと思っています。寄付してみたいという方はぜひ参加をしてみてください。また国連のね WFP は去年ノーベル平和賞を受賞しました。まさに世界が一致団結して食料を求めている人たちのサポートをするべきだ。でも本当に空からね陸から、どんなところにでも食料を届けるんだと活動してきた彼らの存在というのは今本当に必要です。日本国内にいると確かに足元のコロナによる影響は深刻ではあるものの、やっぱり先進国の一役を担う国として我々のこれまでの発展を支えてきてくれたそうした各地域の皆さんにどう還元できるのかというのも問われていると思います。WFP のホームページにアクセスをすると現地からの報告などがですね詳細なリポートが随時更新されています。イエメンをはじめぜひ世界各地に目を向けてみてください。感想をねいくつか紹介させてください。そうマキさんから言葉ね良かったですよね。不安を共感に変えていくという言葉。Love what you do さん。子供にとっても大人にとっても尊厳を持って生きることがどれだけ大切なことか。そうですよね。竹内若菜さん、シェア・ザ・ミールのアプリ前回の配信で知りダウンロードしました。ありがとうございます。いや本当このねスマホのねアプリはね本当よくねできてるんですよ。UI もね非常に操作しやすい感じだし、これ見てるだけで現地の活動の様子とか子どもたちの表情とかも見られるので、これはねもうぜひダウンロード、必要です。ぜひぜひお願いします。せっかくなのでその他のコメントもちょっと紹介していいですか。字幕ありで英語の勉強にもなりますという皆さんイエメンという国はサウジアラビアの南にあるんですねって。そうだからこういうことをきっかけにね世界地図をもう一回開いてみてほしいですね。やっぱり今足元の暮らしに目が行きがちで空を見上げることさえ忘れているぐらい、忙しかったりとかね不安だったりとかっていうこともあるかもしれません。子どもたちの栄養状態が心配ですというストーンさんね。本当に WFP など支援団体が必要ない世界になるまでにはまだまだ時間かかりそうですね。そうなんですよね。山坂ひかりさんからでしたね。スルタン君っていうねということで月刊 WFP の皆さんと一緒にこのように協力しながらライブの現地のね時差の都合とか常にミッションがありますから、必ずしもこの時間帯にはライブではつなげないということがあっても事前に今のようにインタビューをさせていただいてこういう形でライブとミックスして伝えたりすることもやっていきます。次回のね国ももうすでに決まっていてまた確定したら皆さんにお伝えしたいと思います。アフリカの各国、中東各国、アジアもありますしね。ぜひWFP の活動を注目してみてください。なんで僕がそんなことを言っているかというとやっぱりね圧倒的に今世界の異文化や世界の国際情勢に触れる機会っていうのが減ってるなと思うんです。なんでそんなことが必要なんだという方がいるかもしれませんけれども香港人のねウィリアム君の言葉を借りるならば、私の自由は誰かの自由があってこそなんですと。誰かの自由があるから私の自由も保障されてるんですよねって。今こそ本当に世界中のね困っている人たちがいるのであれば一緒になって、未来を作っていくことに貢献してほしい なんかそうやって目を向けることで初めて自分たちの足元の様子も見えてくるのかなと思うので、なかなかねテレビ地上波ではじっくりこんな風に1時間近くかけてイエメンのお話を聞く機会っていうのは限られているかと思いますが、この YouTube チャンネルではそうした国連機関の皆さんや NGO の皆さんと共にお伝えしておりますので、ぜひチャンネル登録を今日のねこの番組もシェアしていただいたりいいねを押していただいたりとか、さらには WFP の活動そのものに、アクセスしていただければと思います。ガウチューブさん、ガウさん、ガウさんありがとうございます。字幕を入れるのにね翻訳を手伝ってくれました。ありがとうございます。普段の買い物も考え直して無駄のない食生活を目指そうと思いました。いいですね。そうですよね。ピーナッツ、日本でねピーナッツバターって言ったらねパンに塗ってある意味、なんだろうな、好みの範囲で食べるものかもしれませんが、皆さんご覧いただいたようにイエメンでは本当に命をつなぐための栄養のための、ピーナッツのペーストでしたよね。かなえさん、これほどの情報社会に暮らしているのに知らないことを知らない現実の多さに驚愕します。知ることは全ての始まり。とても良い勉強になりました。嬉しいですね。恵子井上さん、恵子井上さんは、中東の情報に関してもね発信を続けてこられました。活動を続けてこられましたね。日本語で現地の情報が入る、そして一人一人と出会えるすごく貴重な機会でした。でも貴重な機会にしていかないようにしていきたいと思います。そうね、どうもありがとうございます。で本当はもっと毎日のようにね、お互いに日本と世界がお互いに相互で情報が共有できるようなのが当たり前になってほしいですよね。ありがとうございます。食品ロスも考えないととか、イエメン製のオクラを売ってたら買おう、五右衛門さん、ともさん、デカ盛りの罪は重たいなとかね、いろんなアプローチがあるかと思います。ぜひ皆さんなりの接点を探してみてください。では次回はまた7月に月刊 WFP 世界食糧計画、国連機関の WFP にもぜひ注目をしてください。ということで今夜はこの辺でお別れです。皆さんおやすみなさい。ありがとうございます。